Spoilers! Yes, Alien Covenant has finally been out for a whole weekend now, so let's talk some spoilers, and I have been dying to talk about spoilers in this movie. And yeah, you may notice my background is different today, because it is. I'm at my dad's place right now, but that's not gonna stop me from making a video, apparently, with ominous lighting, because I don't have a light source over here like I usually do. But I make do. Ooh, the AC just turned on. So Alien Covenant starts out before Prometheus, actually. I really like this scene. It's pretty much the origin of David, you know, the android played by Michael Fassbender, who is still awesome in this movie. And you see Guy Pearce as Peter Weyland, who you know from Prometheus. He was an old man in that movie. It was still Guy Pearce. It was really hard to recognize him, but it was him. And it's really neat to know that David named himself after Michelangelo's statue of David. You know, it's like the really upper class kind of mood with classical music and this really bleak white room. You're like, this is gonna get philosophical. Which Prometheus kind of was, but this movie is even more so. So after the title comes up in classic Alien fashion with all the lines that come on the screen and it spells out Alien Covenant, we get to the Covenant ship. It's flying through space and the android Walter is taking care of everything. And then this black hole looking thing from Interstellar just comes out of nowhere and causes this catastrophic event. Wipes out a few of the colonists and the captain of the entire crew, James Franco. Which, alright, before you see this movie, you should probably watch that prologue video called The Last Supper. And I probably should have said that in my review, because James Franco's character is actually the husband of Daniels, the main character in this movie. Or he was her husband, now he's dead. So they decide to go to this other planet. I don't think we know what this planet is called. It's not Orgai 6, that's the planet they were going to go to. And the planet they go to instead is where the Prometheus ship crashed. And I'm thinking this planet might just be LV-426. But only because we don't know what this planet is called, it never says. So it might be LV-426. So they're exploring and a couple of guys separate for like this ecology exam or whatever. They go to investigate the ground. This guy sits down, takes a puff, and like the particles in the air start floating around and combining with each other. The toxic spores that the guy stepped on, like they combine with the smoke from the cigarette and they float around and they go in his ear. Right there you're like, ah man, first to go. Sure enough, he starts getting sick as hell. Same thing with the guy who stepped on the spores when they entered the big ship. So they take the sick guy back to the medical bay and that's when he starts going nuts and that thing comes out of his back. That is so violent. You see the spikes pop out of his back, you're like, ooh! And now we have these neomorphs running around. These kind of pale white versions of xenomorphs. These guys are scary, nasty motherfuckers. They actually stand upright and humanoid, kind of like the xenomorph did in the very first Alien movie. Although this one just looks more real because of, you know, today's technology. And yeah, they made for some really violent, really cool scenes in this film. But the real spoilers I want to talk about with Alien Covenant in particular are the tie-ins with Prometheus. Because like I said, I was watching Prometheus a lot before I saw Alien Covenant, and the more I watched it, the more I liked it. So when they see that hologram of Elizabeth Shaw singing John Denver, singing John Denver and like, you know, manning that control pod, whatever it is, I was so into it. I was like, oh my god, oh my god. And yeah, you find out that this is the planet that Elizabeth Shaw and David went to after the end of Prometheus. And there was another prologue video that came out before this movie. It was called The Crossing, which shows what happened after Prometheus. They arrived on this planet and they showed it in this movie as well. But when they arrived on this planet, there was a civilization of all these engineers from Prometheus. But David had a few loose wires up there, quite literally, so he decided to drop this pathogen like a weapon of mass destruction and just wipe out this entire civilization. That's why all these things are frozen in place, which I guess inspired the poster for this film. And Elizabeth Shaw supposedly died in the crash, or at least that's what David tells the crew. David has been marooned on this planet for 10 years. So yeah, this movie takes place 10 years after Prometheus. So when David finds the crew of the Covenant and starts breaking down everything that's been happening, I just love that. It is continuation from Prometheus. It's proper continuation. Expansion of the story. I love it. And come to find out, David's pretty much lost his mind. Before I get to the point of, oh yeah, David's actually the villain of the story, there are other tie-ins with Prometheus that I want to go over. First and foremost, the music. What can I say? I'm a film score nerd. So the scene where David and Walter are just looking over that precipice and they're quoting Ozymandias, and then you see Elizabeth Shaw's gravestone and you hear the music from Prometheus cue up. Right there I was like, oh my god, that's where the movie really started getting to me. It already had my attention, but this is where I was like, oh, this movie just crossed the line over to awesome. Because you see Elizabeth Shaw's gravestone, and like I said, I love her in Prometheus. I thought she was a complete badass. Yeah, I get it, Ripley's the original badass from the original Alien and Aliens and whatever those other movies were. And alright, credit where it's due, but Elizabeth Shaw, she's probably my favorite character in this entire franchise so far. Well, her and David. So when you see her gravestone, I was like, oh my god, she's dead. Made me sad, what can I say? And that's not even the worst part. Later on, when he's actually playing the melody on his recorder thing, you hear him go. Then he explains to Walter, this is a farewell elegy for my dear Elizabeth. I was like, oh my god, they actually gave this melody, this theme, a meaning? That's why I said in my review, I said they did something with this melody that just blew my mind. It was a genius move. They actually gave it a role in the story. Turns out David actually wrote this piece of music as a farewell goodbye for Elizabeth Shaw, who I guess he was in love with, or at least he says he was. But right there in that scene, that's the scene where I was like, yeah, this movie gets my best rating. That is, it currently has my best rating. It's really gonna have to screw up to not get my best rating. Luckily, it didn't screw up. But getting back to David, because he's really the most spoiler-heavy aspect of this movie, this guy's out of his fucking hard drive. Turns out he kind of describes himself as an amateur zoologist. He's been doing these biological experiments on this alien species and this pathogen, which he brought over from LV-223, and ultimately he created the first xenomorph. And what I'm getting at here is, you remember that mural that he saw in Prometheus, that big xenomorph on the wall? What I'm thinking is, he took a look at that in Prometheus, he was like, I want to make that. That looks like a perfect organism. I mean, talk about curiosity. David was fascinated as hell in Prometheus. You know, when he stepped in that big room with all the holograms, he was really fascinated with all that stuff. So when he and Shaw arrived on this other planet, he started doing all these experiments trying to make this thing he saw on the wall. And he started caring about this a little more than he cared for Elizabeth Shaw. So I guess the first success of his experiments came out of Elizabeth Shaw's body. You see her corpse in this film, it's all busted open. I was like, ugh! And man, when he takes Billy Crudup into that room with all the eggs, you know how this is gonna play out. You saw it in the trailer, first of all. When Billy Crudup's looking at this egg, David's all like, it's perfectly safe. First time I saw this movie, the audience around me was like, oh my god, here it comes. Sure enough, he leans over the thing, David's all like, take a look. I love that, it's great. And sure enough, and it just thing latches onto his face, and now we're gonna see the first xenomorph ever. Yes, David created the xenomorphs. That's cool. Yeah, that xenomorph looking thing at the end of Prometheus was really just an Easter egg. I really don't see it as a tie-in with anything. It's just, hey look, there's an alien thing to show that it all ties together. This is actually the first xenomorph. And I love the dialogue exchange too. When that thing's about to pop out of his chest, Billy Crudup is like, what do you believe in, David? David's response is, creation. And then I thought that was a great scene. So later on, Walter discovers that David's actually a douchebag, and they have themselves a superhero fight. They're throwing each other against the wall. Walter has David pinned to the ground, and there's a knife just out of reach, and then it just cuts away to the next scene. Both time I watched this movie, the person sitting next to me was like, yeah, that's definitely David who won. I was like, man, don't ruin the movie for me like that. You don't actually find out that that is David until the very end of the movie. You got a good like 10-15 minutes thinking that might just be Walter, but it doesn't matter. You want to know why? Because that big xenomorph is awesome! First of all, the visual effects, yeah, that xenomorph looked amazing. Second of all, it was scary as hell. This thing's climbing over the ship, bashing the glass with its head, and ultimately, as they were leaving, this crane on the ship tore that thing to shreds. But there's another one, and it starts attacking the crew until Danny McBride impales it with a bulldozer, and it goes out of the airlock, so now it's gone. So Daniels and Tennessee and the android, I guess, are the only survivors of this crew. So now they're headed off to Orgai 6 finally, to start the colony. And when Daniels goes back into cryosleep, she's like, oh shit, that's actually David, no! She starts crying and yelling. That was probably the best acting from Catherine Waterston I've seen yet. It was really good. And in the end, the villain actually wins. He regurgitates those embryos of facehuggers, puts them in with the colonists, and walks off to Wagner. Great ending to a movie. I can't wait to see where it goes. This is probably the birth of that whole alien hive that was in Aliens. We're seeing the origin of it here thanks to an android named David. That is awesome. So yeah, I love Alien Covenant because of the expansion of the story from Prometheus and how it ties into Alien. I just love that. I thought it was brilliant. This is probably gonna be one of my favorite movies of the year. So Alien Covenant has been out for a weekend now, so have you seen it yet? What did you think about it? Whatever you think, go ahead and leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe. I don't have a guitar here, so I'm gonna go old school.